Welcome to the Stellar Vault. Say hi in the comments to awaken the archive. Then like, subscribe, and let the tale begin.
The seal warning did not scream. It clicked. Rusk already knew what it meant before the alarm finished processing. The small mechanical sound from the pressure sensor above the signal room door was easy to miss, unless you knew what caused it. The outer seal was compromised. Section 7, Bravo, 40 meters from where he was sitting. He had read the station schematics 4 times in the past week, not because anyone assigned them to him, because he could not look at an unfamiliar space without needing to understand its bones. He stood, knocked his knee hard on the console edge. The pain was sharp and irrelevant, and he moved through it, crossing to the reinforced viewport that looked out into the main corridor of the processing hub. The corridor was wide and industrial, lit by amber work lights running on emergency power. Pipes ran along the ceiling in dense, parallel rows. Conduit bundles thick as a man's torso bracketed the walls. The floor was grated metal over open air, a long drop to the lower maintenance level if any section gave way. It was not a corridor built for comfort. It was built to move ore and equipment, and people who had somewhere to be. 3 officers were already moving through it. Commander Pell in front, sidearm drawn. That detail alone told Rusk how fast things had shifted. Pell was a decorated combat commander who treated sidearms as ceremonial on a station with a full rifle complement. Drawing it meant he had assessed the corridor width and decided rifles would slow the response. Lieutenant Kraft and Lieutenant Voss flanked him, rifles up, moving in the low, practiced crouch of people who had done this before. Kraft had survived the Denar offensive. Voss had been recommended for field promotion twice and turned it down both times, preferring to stay with his unit. Rusk watched them move through the viewport glass and felt, for one specific and identifiable moment, entirely safe. Pell knew what he was doing. Kraft and Voss knew what they were doing. This was their function. Rusk's function was the signal room behind him, the analysis console, the pattern work. There was a clean division of labor, and he was standing exactly on his side of it. Then the wall came in. Not an explosion. The Orum did not use explosives. What they used was a focused resonance pulse tuned to the bulkhead's harmonic frequency, and the wall did not shatter. It folded, like something had pressed a thumb into wet clay. A section 3 meters wide buckled inward in a single convulsive motion, and 3 Orum came through the gap before the debris stopped moving. Rusk had studied Orum in intelligence footage. He had cataloged their dimensions, their movement signatures, their tactical formations across dozens of engagement records. He had written detailed reports on their physical capabilities. He believed he had an accurate model of what they were. Standing behind the viewport and watching them move through the collapsed wall, he understood that his model was wrong in one critical way. It had no weight to it, no presence. The footage had given him data. This gave him something else entirely. They were taller than the recordings suggested, or perhaps it was the corridor scale, the way the amber light hit them, the way they moved. The exoskeletal plating was matte gray-black and caught the light wrong, absorbing it rather than reflecting, so they seemed to pull darkness toward themselves as they advanced. They moved on 4 limbs, with the manipulation limbs raised and forward, and the movement was not the heavy lumbering Rusk had half expected from something their size. It was precise. Every step calculated. Every shift of weight exactly sufficient, and nothing more. Like watching a machine that had been optimized to the point where nothing unnecessary remained. Pell fired twice. Both rounds connected. The Orum he targeted staggered. 1 step back, 2, and then it raised its emitter, and the pulse came out, and Pell went down so fast that Rusk's mind refused the image for a full second, insisting on replaying it, looking for the part he had missed, the transitional moment between standing and not standing. There was no transitional moment. That was the point. Craft opened up on full automatic. Brass rained against the grated floor in a continuous cascade, and one of the Orum took enough of it to go down, legs folding, dropping against the wall. The third had already moved. It circled wide along the corridor's edge, using the debris from the collapsed wall as cover, and came up behind Craft before he could track it. Then Craft was on the floor. Voss lasted 4 more seconds, long enough to adjust, fire once more, to almost get clear. He was good, genuinely good, but it wasn't enough. Then the corridor was still. The 3 Orum, 2 standing, 1 down, did not immediately advance. They stopped. A 3-second pause, motionless, their skull ridges working in a slow, oscillating rhythm. Rusk recognized it from the intelligence files. Post-engagement recalibration. The resonance organs sweeping and cataloging, feeding data back to whatever command architecture was directing them. The Calcifier, a command-cast organism of the Orum, positioned somewhere behind the breach point, receiving and processing. The largest of the 2 standing Orum turned and faced the viewport directly. It could not see him. The viewport was tinted. He knew that. He knew it with the same certainty that he knew the station schematics, that he knew the Orum's documented capabilities, that he knew a dozen other things that were true and correct, and completely failed to stop him from taking 2 steps backward until his shoulders hit the signal console. The door behind him opened hard. Tench came through first, Drasso and Mwalo and Balik stacked behind him, weapons up and faces set in the particular expression Rusk had only read about before. The expression of people who have already done the work of accepting the worst possible news and are now operating in the space past it, where there is only the next decision and the one after that. Tench took 1 look at the viewport, 1 look at the corridor beyond it. "How many entry points into this section?" he asked. It took Rusk a half-second to process that the question was directed at him. He was the only one in the room who would know. He had read the schematics. 7 total, Rusk said. 2 are already sealed from the drill platform side. The Orum control those approaches. Of the remaining 5, 3 are standard pressure doors with full sealing capability. 1 is a maintenance hatch that requires manual override from the interior, and 1 is the ventilation conduit on the north face, 40 centimeters wide. "Too narrow," Drasso said. "In standard configuration," Rusk said. "The Orum can compress their manipulation limbs flush against the thorax. I have confirmed it in 3 separate signal intercepts. It occludes the resonance organs partially. Their targeting degrades when they do it, which is why they avoid it, unless the tactical calculus favors the approach. A narrow corridor that bypasses a defended position might favor it." The room was quiet for a moment. Tench looked at him, the way a man looks at a tool he did not know he had. Not warmly. Not with any particular relief. Just with the cold, practical acknowledgement that the tool existed and had a use. "You're the analyst," Tench said. "Yes." "Rusk?" "Yes." "You fire that rifle on your back at anything besides paper?" "At a range, twice, a year and a half ago." Tench made a sound low in his throat that wasn't quite anything. He turned to his people. "Drasso. Mwalo. North face. Ventilation conduit. Pull a frag charge from the locker and set it inside the mouth, motion triggered. Then fall back to the hub. Balik, I want eyes on all 5 entry points. Cycle every 30 seconds. Anything moves, you say it before you think it." He looked at Rusk 1 more time. "You. Stay close. Stay back. You see something that doesn't look right. You say it immediately. Not when you're certain. Immediately." Rusk wanted to explain that certainty was the precondition for useful intelligence. He understood, from the look on Tench's face, that this was not the moment. Understood, he said. What followed was 40 minutes of the most structured terror Rusk had ever experienced. That was the detail that surprised him most, not the fear, which he had expected, but the structure of it. The Orum did not rush all 5 entry points simultaneously. They probed. Single pulses against one door, then silence, then a probe against a different point, then silence again. Methodical. Patient. Like fingers pressing against a surface, mapping softness, measuring resistance. Tench moved his people in response, rotating coverage, and Rusk moved with them and stayed back and watched. But what he was watching was not the doors. He was watching the intervals. Every probe cycle, the silence between attempts shortened by a small but consistent margin. It was not random variation. It was a sequence tightening toward something. The calcifier behind the breach point, processing each response, each reaction time, each defensive adjustment, and recalibrating accordingly, building a model of what it was facing. Rusk built a model of what was building a model of them. The math was not complicated. The intervals were converging. They would reach 0, reach simultaneity, within the next 2 probe cycles. 3 points at once, he estimated, enough to split the defensive response below its functional threshold. And the conduit would be one of them, because the calcifier would have assessed the conduit as the highest value approach given the narrowed defense. They are going to breach 3 points simultaneously, Rusk said. North pressure door, east maintenance hatch, and the conduit. Tench stopped moving. The entire group stopped. 4 sets of eyes on him. When? Tench said. Next probe cycle. Perhaps 90 seconds. Perhaps. I'm not certain. The interval data suggests 90 seconds. The margin for error is real. If you had to bet your life on it. Rusk thought about that phrasing, about the fact that he was, in fact, betting his life on it regardless. 90 seconds, he said. Tench looked at his people. He had 4 of them, 3 entry points. Drasso, east hatch. Weld it if you have to. There's a torch in the maintenance locker. I don't care how you do it. Do not let it open. Mwalo, north door, everything we have. Balik, conduit. Stay on the short range. He paused for 1 second. Rusk, you're with me. North door. They ran. The breach came at 83 seconds. Rusk felt it before he heard it. The resonance pulse moving through the floor and up through his boots and into his back teeth. A vibration that lived below sound and above tolerance. The north pressure door buckled on the second pulse, metal screaming along the seam, and Tench was already firing before it finished falling. Controlled pairs. Disciplined spacing. The first Orum through the breach took 3 rounds center mass and went down hard, crashing into the door remnants, and the second one through moved immediately left. Fast. Practiced. The kind of movement that suggested it had been told exactly how human defenders would respond to a breach. And Rusk raised his rifle without a decision being made, and fired, and missed, and adjusted, and fired again. The Orum hit the wall and slid down it. Rusk stood there for a moment with the rifle still up, and looked at what was on the other side of his sights. "Move," Tench said, already advancing to the breach to check the corridor beyond. Rusk moved. East hatch held. Drasso had found the torch and burned the hatch seam into a single fused piece in the time available, which was not the prescribed procedure for anything, but was completely and immediately effective. From beyond the hatch, they could hear the resonance pulses hitting the metal, probing for give, finding none, and eventually stopping. The conduit was the problem. Balik's voice came over the short range. Contact in the conduit. 3 of them moving through. Charge triggered, but it didn't. A sound that was not quite static. Then nothing. They found Balak 30 meters down the north corridor, alive, sitting against the wall with one arm held at the wrong angle, and the expression of someone who had recently experienced something they had not finished processing. The comms equipment was distributed across a 10-meter section of corridor in pieces ranging from component-sized to fragment-sized. The Orum had moved through the conduit in compressed configuration, absorbed the frag charge at reduced targeting capacity, and still managed, with whatever targeting remained, to prioritize and destroy the communications equipment before Mwalo brought the crew-served railgun to the conduit mouth and ended the engagement. The railgun's targeting assembly cracked on the third shot, a hairline fracture that ran through the primary alignment housing. It would not fire accurately again without a replacement part that existed somewhere in the station's maintenance inventory, somewhere being the operative word, because the maintenance inventory was on the drill platform side, which the Orum held. Rusk sat on the floor next to Balak, while Mwalo worked on the arm with the medkit. He looked at the pieces of the comms equipment spread across the corridor and understood, with the specific clarity that came when a pattern reached its terminal point, exactly what had just happened. The Orum had not prioritized the humans in the conduit engagement. They had prioritized the equipment. They had assessed, correctly, that destroying the communications capability was worth absorbing casualties to achieve, which meant the Calcifier had identified communications as a strategic asset worth more than the tactical cost of the engagement. Which meant the Calcifier was thinking several moves ahead. Tench crouched next to him, not to check on him, to use him. "What do they do next?" Tench asked. Rusk looked at the corridor, at the sealed hatch, at the breach they had held, and the conduit they had almost not held, at Balak's arm, and the broken railgun, and the debris of the only equipment that could have told anyone outside this station that they were still alive. "The probing is finished," Rusk said. "They have a complete map of our defensive capability now. They know what we have, approximately where we are, and what we no longer have. The next move will not be a test. It will be the answer." Tench was quiet. His eyes moved across the corridor, calculating in the way of someone who had been doing this for a long time and was doing it now, faster than usual. "Then we need to know something they don't," he said. Rusk looked at the destroyed comms equipment, at the crack in the railgun housing, at the 4 people who were left, and the walls around them, and the Orum on the other side of those walls running their calculations. "They have never encountered something that reads them back," Rusk said. "Every engagement on this station, they expected reaction. They built their model on the assumption that we respond to what they do. They have not accounted for the possibility that someone is watching the pattern underneath the response, building a counter model while they build theirs." Tench looked at him for a long moment. The amber worklight made the shadows on his face deep and fixed. "Then stop watching," Tench said. "Start using it." Rusk looked at the wall. Beyond it, somewhere in the deep corridors or the ruined outer sections, a calcifier was processing new data, tightening its model, preparing the answer. He thought about what it felt like to fire a rifle and not miss the second time. He thought about what it would cost to become someone who did not need certainty before he moved. He looked at Tench. "I need a map of the deep corridors," he said. "Everything below level 4. And I need to know what demolitions Mwalo has left." Tench held his gaze for one more second. Then he stood up. "Mwalo," he said. "Talk to the man." The Phase 1 schematics were not on the station's active registry. Rusk found them buried in a maintenance archive subfolder that had not been accessed in what the timestamp suggested was a very long time. They were not hidden. They were simply old enough that no one had thought to look for them. The original construction survey files from when Kepler Station was nothing but a pressurized shell and a drilling mandate. Before the processing hub existed, before the deep corridors were expanded and reinforced and connected into the network the current schematics showed. Before, there were the Phase 1 tunnels, narrow service passages running beneath what was now the Orum-held outer section, connecting the original drill housing to the first pressurization plant. They were not on any scan the Orum would have run when they mapped the station prior to assault. They were not on any briefing document Rusk had seen in the past 2 days. They were on a construction file from before most of the people currently on this station were born. He put his finger on the schematic and traced the route. "This runs directly beneath their current position," he said. "The calcifier is here." He tapped a point near the outer processing ring, based on the pulse intervals I tracked during the probe sequence. The Phase 1 main passage comes within 8 meters of that position vertically. There is a ventilation shaft that connects them. Tench looked at the schematic, then at Rusk, then at the schematic again. "You want to go up through the floor at it," he said. "I want to go up through the floor, beneath it, observe, and then make a decision with better information than we currently have." "Yes." "That is a long way of saying yes." "Yes," Rusk said. Tench pulled the schematic toward him and studied it for 30 seconds without speaking. His finger moved along the tunnel route, pausing at junctions, measuring distances with the practiced eye of someone who had been reading terrain his whole working life. "Balik," he said, without looking up. Balik was sitting against the wall, his arms strapped tight against his chest, his working hand resting on his knee. "Sergeant." "You stay. You make noise. Full defensive pattern. Rotate positions every 10 minutes. I want them thinking all of us are still here." He looked at Balik's arm. "You can manage that." It was not a question. "I can manage that," Balik said. Tench looked at Drasso and Mualo. "We move in 4 minutes. Light load. What you carry, nothing else. Mualo, what do we have left?" Mualo had already laid it out on the floor beside his kit. 3 frag charges, 1 shaped breaching charge, smaller than standard, the kind used for cutting through internal bulkheads rather than exterior walls, a length of det cord, 2 trigger units, 1 remote, 1 contact. The breaching charge is the only thing that will matter at close range against the calcifier's plating, he said. The frags will slow it. They will not stop it. Noted, Tench said. Rusk, you lead through the tunnels. You know the route. Rusk looked at the schematic one more time, committing the junctions to memory. Left at the first branch. Straight through the second junction. The collapsed section, flagged on the old survey as a partial structural failure, pre-existing, probably unrelated to the current assault, was 300 meters in. They would deal with it when they reached it. Ready, he said. The entrance to the Phase 1 tunnels was behind a maintenance panel in the lowest level of the processing hub, beneath a coolant exchange unit that had not functioned in years. Drasso pulled the panel, and the smell hit them immediately, cold and stale, and carrying the particular quality of air that had been sealed away from circulation for a very long time. Not dangerous, just old. Like opening something that had been waiting. They went in single file, Rusk first, then Tench, then Drasso, then Mualo. The passage was narrow enough that Rusk's shoulders brushed both walls simultaneously when he tensed, which he tried to stop doing, and mostly failed. The floor was original construction, bare composite, unfinished, laid fast by crews who were building infrastructure rather than accommodations. The ceiling ran low. Tench, the tallest of them, moved in a sustained half-crouch that Rusk did not envy. The lighting was whatever they carried. Rusk had a hand lamp from the signal room. Tench and Drasso had helmet-mounted lights. Mualo had both, and used neither, moving by the light of the others, with the relaxed confidence of someone accustomed to working in bad conditions. The first 2 junctions were clean. Rusk navigated them from memory, and the group moved fast and quiet. The only sounds their boots on the composite floor and the distant, intermittent resonance pulses from above, muffled by the station's internal structure, but still present, still felt in the chest and teeth. The Orum were continuing to probe the processing hub. Balak was doing his job. The third junction was where the schematic ended and the problem began. The partial collapse flagged on the old survey was not partial anymore. At some point between the original construction and the present moment, a long time ago, probably, given the rust patterns on the exposed structural members, a section of ceiling had come down and filled approximately 4 meters of the passage with debris. Not a solid blockage, not a wall, a compressed heap of old composite panels, conduit sections, and fragments of an original drilling support frame, all of it packed together into an uneven mass that shifted slightly under its own weight. There were gaps through it, narrow, irregular, just wide enough to force a body through sideways or over the top, but none of it looked stable. Every surface carried the sense that it could give way under pressure, that one wrong step might bring the whole section down. Rusk looked at it, looked at the space above the debris pile where the ceiling had been, and where there was now a gap of perhaps 50 centimeters between the top of the heap and the intact ceiling beyond. "We go over," he said. "The whole thing could shift," Drasso said. "Yes." "If it shifts while someone is on top of it." "Yes," Rusk said. "I know. We go over." He went first. It was not bravery. It was the acknowledgement that he had chosen this route, and the logic of that choice extended to its consequences. He moved slowly, distributing his weight across the debris, testing each handhold before committing, feeling the heap settle and creak beneath him in ways that he noted and filed and did not react to because reacting would not help. The gap at the top was tight. He turned sideways and moved through it with the lamp clenched in his teeth and came down the other side into clear passage and stood up and breathed. Tench came next, then Moilo. Drasso was halfway over when a section of the frame beneath him shifted. His left leg dropped through a gap in the debris, and the momentum pulled him sideways, and he caught himself on a conduit section that held, barely, and wrenched himself free, and came over the top, fast and ungraceful, and came down the other side hard on his right knee. He did not make a sound. He stood up. He tested the knee with his weight. It held. He nodded once. They kept moving. 200 meters further, the passage reached the ventilation shaft. Vertical, 40 centimeters square, running straight up through 8 meters of station infrastructure to the grating above. Rusk could hear the Orum from here, not their weapons. Their movement, the low resonance of their locomotion transmitted through the structure, a subtle rhythmic vibration that the resonance organs produced as a byproduct of their sensory function. It was not something a human would notice without knowing to listen for it. Rusk listened for it. He went up the shaft slowly, using the conduit brackets as handholds, and when he reached the grating, he stopped and looked through. The Calcifier was 12 meters away. It was larger than the combat units, significantly larger. The body mass devoted not to the manipulation limbs, but to the processing structures along the dorsal ridge, a dense cluster of resonance organs that pulsed with a slow, deep rhythm entirely unlike the combat unit's scanning sweep. It was not moving. It was positioned at the center of what had been an ore staging area, surrounded by 3 combat units, standing in a fixed, triangular pattern around it, and it was transmitting. Rusk watched the transmission pulse, watched the interval, watched the directionality of the signal. The Calcifier's ridge organs oriented not toward the processing hub, but outward, through the station's exterior wall, toward something beyond. He felt the understanding arrive the way it always did, not as a sudden flash, as a weight settling into place. The Calcifier was not only running the assault, It was in contact with a second force outside the station, guiding it in real time with everything it had learned about the human defensive position. Probe results, response times, identified weaknesses, the comms loss, the railgun, Balik's arm, all of it transmitted outward to a force that would arrive already, knowing what it was walking into. He descended the shaft without making a sound. At the bottom, he looked at Tench and said quietly, "The Calcifier is transmitting to a second force. Everything it has learned about us is going out right now. When that force arrives, it will have a complete picture of our position and capability." Tench processed this in about 2 seconds. "Then we have to hit it before it finishes." "We have to hit it now," Rusk said. Tench looked at Mualo. Mualo already had the breaching charge in his hands. "The grating," Tench said. "Contact trigger," Mualo said. "Set it on the charge. Push the charge through the grating when it opens. Let the contact arm the moment it clears the shaft." "Distance from the shaft mouth to the calcifier?" 12 meters, Rusk said. 3 combat units between us and it in triangular formation. Tench looked at the shaft, looked at Drasso, who was standing with his weight slightly off the right knee, but his rifle up and his face completely settled. Looked at Mualo. "Frags first," he said. All 3, through the grating, dispersed. The moment the combat units break formation to respond, the breaching charge goes through. "Rusk, when that grating opens, you are behind me and you stay behind me. You understand." "I understand," Rusk said. It came out with less resistance than he expected. They went up the shaft in order. Tench first now, then Drasso, then Mualo with the charges. Rusk last. Tench hit the grating hard with his shoulder, and it gave. Old fasteners, decades without maintenance. And the 3 frags went through in fast succession, Tench and Drasso throwing without exposing themselves fully, pulling back below the lip. The frag detonations came almost simultaneously. Sharp concussive cracks ringing through the metal structure. Smoke poured down into the shaft. Above them, the combat units moved. Formation breaking. Repositioning toward the new threat. Mualo pushed past him, climbing. The breaching charge went through. The detonation that followed was not like the frags. It was focused, directional. A single enormous crack of pressure driving outward from a point. And then the sound of the calcifier. Rusk had never heard an Orum vocalize before, had not known they could. It wasn't a scream. It was a subsonic pulse, so low it was more felt than heard. A deep wrongness that moved through the chest and was gone. The calcifier did not move again. Then the combat units above changed. The tactical spacing dissolved. The triangular formation that had held with geometric precision across the entire engagement collapsed into something else. Still lethal, still fast, but no longer coordinated, no longer adaptive, no longer receiving instruction. They pushed, hard, toward every human position simultaneously, base protocol driving them forward without the calcifier's adjustments, without strategy, without the patient probing intelligence that had made them so dangerous. "Back," Tench said. "Now." They went back through the shaft and into the passage and ran. Drasso ran on the bad knee without complaint, and Mualo ran with the empty charge housing still in his hands because he didn't have time to drop it, and Rusk ran and did not think about anything except the route. Left at the junction, straight through the second. The collapse. The collapse was worse going back. They could hear the Orum above them now, the base protocol push resonating through the structure, pulses hitting the processing hub in rapid, uncoordinated sequence, no longer probing, but hammering. Balik was somewhere above that sound, doing what Tench had told him to do, and Rusk did not let himself think about that. Drasso went over the debris pile first this time, fast and reckless. The pile shifted badly under him, but he made it across and didn't stop. Wallow followed, clean and controlled. Tench went next. The pile shifted again, worse this time, and part of the old frame dropped through with a sharp crack. The collapse settled lower, the space tightening. The gap they had used on the way in now reduced to a narrow slot that would require crawling through. Rusk went through flat on his stomach with the hand lamp in his fist and came up on the other side into the lower level of the processing hub and heard the rail gun, cracked, broken, supposedly dead, fire once with a sound like tearing metal, and stop. Balik, he thought, making noise. They came up through the maintenance panel and into the processing hub, and Balik was at the far end of the room, on his feet, one arm strapped and useless, the other holding a rifle he had been firing from a braced position against the wall. 3 of the entry points were showing pressure stress, the doors bowing inward under repeated pulse impacts, the seams beginning to separate. The welded east hatch was still holding. For now. Tench looked at the doors, looked at what was left of them, the 4 of them still standing. The demolished comms, the broken railgun, the empty charge housing in Mwallo's hands. "The tunnel collapse," he said to Rusk. "It will not survive another passage," Rusk said. "The frame section that dropped, the structural integrity of that section is critically compromised. One more significant load event, and it fills completely. Can we bring it down deliberately?" Rusk thought about the det cord still in Mwallo's kit, about the remaining trigger unit, about the specific geometry of the collapsed section, and where a charge would need to be placed to ensure complete fill rather than partial. "Yes," he said. "But once it comes down, the tunnel is gone. There is no second approach through Phase 1. "That's not what I asked," Tench said. Rusk understood what he was asking. The tunnel was the only route beneath the Orum position. If they brought it down, they closed the one back door they had found. But they also created a choke point, a fully collapsed section that even base protocol Orum could not push through without time and equipment they did not have. It bought them something. It cost them something. Those 2 facts sat in direct opposition, and there was no version of the calculation that made both of them go away. The north pressure door bowed inward with a sound like a struck bell. The seam at the top corner had separated by 3 centimeters. "We bring it down," Rusk said. Tench nodded once. He looked at his people, at the doors, at what was left between them and the Orum that were no longer thinking, only pushing. "Then we need a reason that matters when they get through," he said, "because they are getting through." Rusk looked at the room, at the station schematic still open on the console, at the thing he had been looking at in the back of his mind since Tench first told him to stop watching and start using it. The Orum's second force was still coming, with everything the Calcifier had transmitted before they silenced it. But the Calcifier was gone now, and what the second force did not know, what it could not know, because the transmission had ended, was that the humans were no longer where the data said they were. Rusk sat down at the console. "Mwallo," he said, "I need 20 minutes, and I need you to not collapse that tunnel until I say it." Mwallo looked at Tench. Tench looked at the bowing door, looked at Rusk. 18, Tench said. Rusk was already working. 18 minutes was not enough time to do this properly. Rusk was not trying to do it properly. The station's pressurization system wasn't a weapon. It had never been designed as one. It was a network of sealed conduits, pressure regulators, and emergency blowout valves that existed for one purpose: to maintain breathable atmosphere inside a structure sitting in conditions that would kill an unprotected human in under 2 minutes. The engineering was industrial and robust, and had been maintained well enough that even after days of combat damage, it was still mostly functional. Mostly was the operative word. Rusk worked with mostly. The drill platform approach, the two sealed entry points the Orum had taken in the opening assault, connected to the station's interior through a transition corridor. A pressurized airlock buffer zone, 40 meters long, designed to allow suited personnel to move between the exterior platform environment and the station interior without compromising internal atmosphere. It had two sets of blast doors, one facing the drill platform side, one facing the processing hub side. The Orum's second force would come through the drill platform side. They would move through the transition corridor expecting to reinforce a completed assault. The data the Calcifier had transmitted told them there was a human defensive position in the processing hub, a position with compromised comms, a broken railgun, depleted munitions, and a specific number of defenders at specific locations. That data was 18 minutes old and getting older. Rusk pulled up the pressurization control interface and mapped what he needed. The transition corridor had its own pressure regulation node, independent from the main hub system, designed to be isolated during airlock cycling. If that node was overridden and the corridor's internal pressure was dropped, while both sets of blast doors were sealed, the corridor became a vacuum. If the outer blast doors were then opened, while the inner ones held, the corridor connected to the exterior atmosphere. Non-breathable, minus many degrees, immediate. The Orum wore no suits. They had no need for them. Their exoskeletal plating handled pressure variance across a significant range. But not that range. No biology handled that range without protection. "It will work," Mualo said, looking at the schematic over his shoulder. His voice was flat and certain, in the way of someone assessing a technical problem rather than a moral one. "The override is accessible from here. The outer door trigger is on the same circuit. One command string, sequential. Drop pressure. Confirm seal on inner doors. Open outer." "From this console," Rusk said. "From this console. Remotely." Tench had been standing behind them both, reading the schematic without speaking. He spoke now. "We have to get them into the corridor first. They will enter through the drill platform approach because that is the entry point the Calcifier's transmission, designated as the assembly corridor for reinforcement," Rusk said. "They will move to that corridor because that is what the data tells them to do. They will expect to link with the first wave units inside the hub and proceed to the processing hub together." "And the first wave units?" "Are on base protocol. No Calcifier to coordinate with. When the second force enters, and no link-up signal comes, the base protocol response is to hold position and await recalibration. They will not advance into the corridor. They will stand in the hub and wait." Tench looked at him for a moment. "You are betting all of this on the base protocol response being what you say it is." "I have analyzed Orum base protocol behavior across more engagement records than anyone currently alive," Rusk said. "Yes." Tench nodded. "Then we have one problem left," he said. "We have to not be in the processing hub when they come through, because if the first wave units are standing in the hub waiting for recalibration, and we are also in the hub, we are standing next to them." "There is a secondary sealed section," Rusk said. He pointed to the schematic. "The original pressurization plant from Phase 1 construction. It is accessible from the lower level, and it is still sealed. I confirmed the integrity readings 10 minutes ago. It is not on the Calcifier's transmitted map because it is not on the current station schematics. It is on the Phase 1 survey." "The same survey that gave us the tunnels," Tench said. "Yes." Another silence. Tench looked at Drasso, who was leaning against the wall, rifle across his knees, bad leg extended, face showing nothing. Looked at Mualo. At Balik, still at his position by the far wall, one arm strapped, watching the bowing doors. "Mualo," Tench said. "The tunnel." Mualo picked up the det cord and the last trigger unit and went. The north pressure door, gave under the strain while he was setting the charge. It did not explode inward. The seam at the top corner separated fully. The pneumatic seal broke, and the door swung inward on its lower hinge like something exhausted, and 2 Orum came through before it finished moving. Tench was already firing, and Rusk was with him. The first Orum took the rounds and kept coming. Base protocol, no adaptation, just forward. Until Tench put 4 more shots into it and dropped it hard. The second was already past it, moving straight for Rusk. He stepped left without thinking and fired twice, the second shot catching at the junction of the neck plate and the dorsal ridge. The Orum dropped and did not move. Drasso was up, moving to the door to hold the gap. The east hatch gave way, not the weld, the wall around the weld. The repeated resonance impacts had degraded the composite surrounding the hatch frame until the frame itself tore free, the whole assembly falling inward, and 3 Orum came through the gap simultaneously. Drasso was at the north door. Mwalo was in the tunnel access. Balik fired from his position with 1 arm. His shots were wild, but they were loud, and they drew attention, giving Tench the opening he needed to move toward the east gap, bringing Rusk with him. What happened in the next 90 seconds was not tactical. It was close and loud, and paid for by people who had nothing left to spend. Tench took a resonance pulse across the left shoulder. Not a direct hit. A partial. The shot aimed at his center mass, but the angle was wrong because he was already moving. The partial was still enough to drop him to 1 knee. He got back up. He kept firing. Balik ran empty and used the rifle as the only thing it was still good for, and the Orum he swung it at went down and did not get up. Balik stood over it, breathing hard, and his face was the face of someone who had just done something they would think about later. Drasso held the north door gap through 3 Orum pushes. The fourth came with 2 of them at once, and his positioning was off, a half step back when he needed to be forward. The resonance pulse hit him center mass. Drasso went down and did not get back up. Drasso went down and did not get back up. The 2 Orum that had forced their way through the gap stood over him for a fraction of a second, before Mwalo came back from the tunnel access and dropped them both from 8 meters. The north gap was clear. The east gap was clear. The processing hub was still. Rusk looked at Drasso. He did not look for long. There was no time, and looking longer would not change anything, and he knew that, and it did not help. "Tunnel," Tench said. His voice was the same as it had been since the beginning. That was the most unsettling thing about him. "Move." They moved. Tench first, 1 arm working fully, the other moving at reduced capacity and making no complaints about it. Balik. Mwalo. Rusk last, pulling the lower-level access panel shut behind him. The det cord charge went at the tunnel collapse point 30 seconds after they cleared it. The sound traveled through the composite walls as a deep resonant crack, and then the structural groan of a ceiling section releasing, and then silence. The Phase 1 main passage was gone. Whatever was behind them would find rubble. The original pressurization plant was small. It had been built to house the equipment that kept 12 construction workers alive during the Phase 1 build, and it had exactly that much space and no more. 4 people fit inside it the way 4 people fit inside a space that was meant for equipment, technically without comfort. The integrity held. The atmosphere held. They waited. The waiting was its own kind of work. Above them and around them, transmitted through the structure in low vibration, they could feel the second Orum force arriving. The pattern was different from the first wave. More units, moving in coordinated formation, the kind of movement that came from a force that had been briefed and had a clear operational picture. The Orum came through the drill platform approach exactly as Rusk had said they would, moving down the transition corridor on the Calcifier's last transmission. Rusk had the pressurization control interface open on a portable unit pulled from the signal room before they left. He watched the pressure readings in the transition corridor and the door status indicators. Both inner blast doors were sealed. The outer doors were sealed as well. The Orum's second force was inside the corridor now, moving toward the inner doors, expecting to push through into the hub and link with the first wave. He looked at Tench. Tench looked back at him. His left arm was held slightly away from his body. His face was the same. "Do it," Tench said. Rusk entered the command string. The sequence ran as designed. The corridor's regulation node was overridden, and the atmosphere began to vent, the pressure dropping steadily as the system bled it off into recirculation. The Orum felt the change and responded the only way they could, by pushing forward toward the inner doors, toward the pressure they expected to find. The inner doors held. On the final command, the outer doors opened. The readings spiked once, then collapsed to 0. The corridor went flat, every sensor registering the same absence at the same time. Rusk closed the outer doors and restored the pressure sequence. His hands were steady. He noticed that, and then he noticed that he was noticing it, which didn't help. Above them, the first wave Orum held their positions in the processing hub. Base protocol. No calcifier. No second force signal. No target presenting itself. They stood in the ruins of the hub among the broken doors and the debris and the bodies, and waited for a recalibration instruction that wasn't going to come. Rusk sat in the pressurization plant with Tench, Mwalo, and Balik, tracking the vibration patterns through the structure. He said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. Tench sat with his back against the equipment housing, his left arm held still. Mwalo cleaned the empty charge housing with a cloth from his kit, methodically, the way he did everything. Balik slept, or reached something close enough that the distinction didn't matter. 3 hours later, the vibration patterns changed. Rusk felt it first, the specific frequency of Orum locomotion shifting from stationary to mobile, the rhythmic pulse of their movement transmitting through the composite floor, and then the pattern moving, not toward them, not toward any human position. Moving for the drill platform, then outward, back to whatever transit had brought them here. The math had changed. The calcifier was gone. The second force was gone. The processing hub offered no further strategic value that justified the cost of continuing against an enemy that had demonstrated it could not be predicted by the models available. The Orum left, not routed, not broken. They walked out of Kepler Station the way they had walked into everything, precise, controlled, following a decision already made. They left their dead where they had fallen. The dead had no further operational value. They did not look back. It wasn't in the protocol. Tench waited 40 minutes after the vibrations stopped. Then he opened the pressurization plant hatch. They came up through the lower level into the processing hub and stood in it. The amber work lights were still running. The grated floor was still there, the drop beneath it unchanged. The pipes and conduit bundle still ran along the ceiling. It was the same room, and it was completely different. Rusk walked through it slowly, past the collapsed north door, past the torn-out east hatch frame, past the places where the floor told stories he did not need to read, because he had been there for all of them. He stopped at the north door gap. Drasso was still there. The Orum had not moved him. He was on his back, and his rifle was still in his hands, because he had not let go of it. Rusk had read casualty reports for 3 years. He had processed loss as data, as strategic cost, as variables in an operational equation. He understood now that he had not understood anything. He stood there for a moment that was not long enough, and never would be, looking at the man who had crossed the tunnel collapse on a bad knee, held the door through 3 pushes, and lost his footing on the 4th. Tench came to stand beside him. He said nothing. It was the right thing to do, and he knew it. Behind them, Mwalo was already assessing the structural damage with the focused attention of someone who needed something to do. Balik sat on the floor and looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man building a wall between now and later, one brick at a time. Somewhere beyond the station's exterior, in the dark between stars that had no names anyone on Earth would ever know, the Orum force was recalculating. Filing a new variable into whatever architecture processed their understanding of the galaxy. A species they had assessed as predictable had produced something they had not modeled. They would model it now. They would adapt. They would come back. Rusk knew that. He stood in the broken room and knew it with the same clarity he knew everything, and with the full weight of what that knowledge cost. He had gone into the signal room as an analyst. He had come out of something else entirely. The man who read patterns from a safe distance was still there, but not alone. There was something else with him now. Quieter, colder, willing to act before it was certain, willing to spend people when the math required it, able to enter a command string and watch a pressure reading go flat without losing control. Standing in the amber light over Drasso's body, he did not know if what he had become was worth the cost. The only thing he was sure of was that the cost had been too high.